Lily sat quietly in the corner of the crowded mall, a slight ache in her chest as she watched her twins, Michael and Emma, run excitedly toward the toy store. The sounds of their laughter filled the air, a contrast to the deep, lingering silence inside her. It had been 8 long years since her life had been turned upside down by David's sudden disappearance. She hadn't expected much when she entered the mall today, just a quiet afternoon out with the kids, maybe a moment of distraction from the constant memories that still haunted her. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the shock that awaited. The twins were nearly a mirror image of their father, tall for their age, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to shine like his had. It was impossible not to see the resemblance to David in every feature of their faces. Yet, despite everything, they had never known him. Lily hadn't spoken of him much, not to the twins, not to anyone. She'd shielded them from the past, from the man who had promised her forever and then vanished without a word. There had been no calls, no apologies, just silence. David had disappeared as quickly as he had come into her life, leaving her with nothing but the echoes of broken promises. As she watched Michael and Emma eagerly look at a shelf of stuffed animals, Lily felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't fair to them, was it? They deserved to know their father, to feel the kind of love that only a parent can provide. But how could she tell them about David? How could she explain the man who had promised to cherish her, only to leave her in the cold, alone with their children? Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice she hadn't heard in years. Lily? The word was like a slap to her face. She turned slowly, the name clinging to her as if it had never truly left. Standing in front of her was David. Her heart raced, and she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It couldn't be. After all this time, after everything, there he was, looking exactly as he had the last time she saw him. His dark hair was a little grayer at the temples, and there was a certain weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, but the arrogance in his posture, the sharp lines of his jaw, it was unmistakably him. David. The man who had once promised her a lifetime of love and security, only to walk away without explanation, without even a second thought. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them standing in the vast emptiness of everything unsaid. Lily's hands trembled, but she quickly hid them in the pockets of her jacket, refusing to let him see how much his sudden appearance had rattled her. She had moved on. She had to. She was stronger now, capable of taking care of her children. Without him. So why did it feel as though a weight had dropped into her chest? David's eyes flickered toward the twins, and for the briefest of moments, there was a flash of recognition. They were both staring at him now, their faces painted with curiosity. Emma tugged at Lily's sleeve. "Mom, who is that?" she whispered, her voice high with innocence. Lily swallowed hard. "That," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "is your father." The words hung in the air like a terrible secret, one that had been buried for so long it had grown dangerous to unearth. The twins exchanged a glance, their brows furrowing in confusion. They had never heard the word father spoken with such gravity before. Their world had always been about her, about the mother who raised them, loved them, and protected them from a man they had never known. The idea of a father, especially one who had been absent for so long, seemed foreign to them. David took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on the twins. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. What could he say? How could he explain why he had left them all those years ago? There was no simple answer, no excuse that could cover the years of silence, the abandonment. All he had now were questions. What had happened to them during all this time? How had they turned out? And why hadn't Lily reached out to him? Lily's heart beat louder, but she forced herself to stand tall. "You should go," she said quietly, her voice tinged with the years of anger and betrayal she had tried so hard to bury. "You don't belong here. Not anymore." David flinched at her words, but before he could respond, Michael stepped forward. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice full of innocent curiosity. The resemblance to David was unmistakable, even in the way Michael held himself, as though he knew there was something important about this moment, something that could change everything. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. She had to remain strong. She couldn't let David see her weakness, not now, not after everything. He's someone who left us a long time ago, she said firmly. And we're better off without him. David winced at her words, the weight of the truth settling in his chest. He had never imagined it would be like this, that Lily would be so cold, so distant. He had known she was hurt, but seeing it so plainly, hearing it in her voice, it was different than he had expected. He wanted to reach out, to explain, but what could he say? There were no words for the years he had lost, no words that could ever take away the hurt he had caused. The twins continued to stare at him, unsure of how to react. They didn't understand what was happening, only that something was off, something was wrong. David opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, Lily turned to walk away. "Let's go, kids," she said, her voice steady, but there was an unmistakable edge of finality to it. Michael hesitated, looking back at David, who remained frozen in place. His eyes, filled with curiosity and uncertainty, seemed to say more than words ever could. "Who is he, Mom?" he asked again, but this time there was a deeper question in his tone. Lily stopped, her back turned to David. She didn't want to look at him anymore. She didn't want to feel the pain of those memories rushing back, memories of a time when she had believed in the lies he had told her. But she had to answer. For the sake of her children, she had to give them something. "He's your father," she said quietly, her voice soft but full of weight. David watched them leave, his chest tight, his mind racing. He didn't know what he had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. He had no idea how to approach Lily, how to bridge the gap of all those years of silence. And more than anything, he didn't know if he could ever make it right again. As Lily and the twins walked away, David stood motionless, his gaze lingering on them. He couldn't help but think about the life he had left behind, the family he had abandoned. The guilt washed over him in waves, but it didn't change the reality of the situation. He had walked away. He had chosen power and success over love and family. And now, standing there in the mall, he realized that the price for that choice had been higher than he had ever imagined. Lily had always believed in love at first sight. When she met David, everything felt destined. He was everything she had ever dreamed of, charming, successful, and with a warmth in his smile that made her feel like the world was at her feet. Their relationship moved quickly, the chemistry undeniable, and soon enough, they were married in an elegant ceremony. The grand event was a reflection of the life they would build together, a life filled with luxurious vacations, dinners in fine restaurants, and every material comfort they could want. David had a way of making her feel like the center of the universe. He had a business empire that seemed unstoppable, and for a while, it was easy to get lost in the thrill of it all. Lily had never been one to chase after wealth or status, but being with David opened up a world she had never known. She lived in a grand mansion with high ceilings and marble floors, surrounded by sparkling chandeliers and rare art pieces. They had everything, at least, it seemed that way. Yet, for all his external success, there was something in David that remained distant, elusive. In the early days of their marriage, Lily had been so wrapped up in their new life that she didn't notice the subtle cracks in his personality. He worked long hours, sometimes disappearing for days, leaving her to entertain herself in their beautiful but empty home. The first time she questioned his commitment was when he didn't return from a business trip for nearly a week. At first, she brushed it off. It was just work, after all. But as time passed, his excuses grew more frequent, and his presence less consistent. He would come home late at night, smelling of whiskey and stress, and retreat into his study, where he'd stay for hours on end, going over documents, making phone calls, pushing himself further into the world of business that seemed to consume him. Lily had tried to be understanding. She told herself it was just the nature of his work. She told herself that as long as they had their future, their children, and their dreams of growing old together, it would be worth the sacrifices. But then, one evening, she woke up in the middle of the night to find him missing from their bed. The house was silent, and her heart skipped a beat as she realized that she didn't know where he was. She found him in his office, slumped in the chair, staring blankly at a screen. When she asked him what was wrong, he didn't respond. He just stared at her with empty eyes, as though he didn't recognize her. That night, the distance between them seemed to stretch further. She couldn't put her finger on what had changed, but she felt it, the shift in their relationship. It wasn't just the late nights or the workaholic tendencies. It was the growing sense that David wasn't fully present anymore, that his mind and heart were elsewhere. Lily tried everything to keep the connection alive. She planned dinners, took up new hobbies, and even tried to be more patient when he was gone for days at a time. But the effort was always one-sided. David's responses grew shorter, his attention span dwindling. He stopped telling her about his day, stopped showing interest in her own. The warmth that once drew them together had faded, replaced by an unbearable coldness that Lily couldn't ignore. One night, after yet another dinner where David had barely spoken a word, Lily found herself sitting alone in their massive living room, feeling like a stranger in her own life. She could hear the distant hum of the city outside the window, but inside, there was nothing but silence. It was as if the world had moved on without her, leaving her behind in a gilded cage. That was when she made the decision to confront him. She waited until the morning, when David was sitting at the kitchen table with his papers scattered around him, a cup of coffee in hand. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation she had been avoiding for so long. "David," she began softly, "I need to know what's going on. Why are you shutting me out? Why are you so distant?" David didn't look up from his papers. He seemed unfazed by her question, almost as if he hadn't heard her. For a long moment, there was no response, and then, with a sigh, he finally spoke. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, almost under his breath. Lily's heart sank. "I want to understand," she pressed, her voice a little more forceful now. "I'm your wife. I'm supposed to be a part of your life, not just a bystander." David set his coffee cup down slowly, his eyes dark with frustration. "It's complicated, Lily. You don't get it. I'm trying to build something that will last beyond all this. I don't have time for anything else." The words cut through her like a knife. "You don't have time for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. David's gaze met hers, and for the first time in weeks, he actually looked at her, not through her, not past her. But what she saw in his eyes wasn't the love she once knew. It was something colder, harder. "Maybe I don't," he said, his tone flat. "I've got bigger things to worry about." Lily felt the weight of his words crashing down on her. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The finality of his statement left her speechless. He wasn't just emotionally distant, he had already made up his mind. He had chosen his work, his empire, over her and everything they had built together. It was in that moment that the walls between them began to form, solidifying a distance she had never thought possible. The man she had married, the man she had believed in, was no longer there. In his place was someone else, someone who was willing to sacrifice everything for success, for power, for control. And Lily realized, in that instant, that she wasn't enough. She had never been enough. The days that followed were a blur. David threw himself even deeper into his work, disappearing for days at a time, and Lily tried to keep everything together. She kept up appearances, maintained the house, and continued to be the wife everyone thought she was. But inside, something was breaking. She couldn't shake the feeling that David was slipping further away, and that the love they had once shared had vanished without a trace. Then came the day that she never saw coming. David came home late one night, packing his suitcase. He barely looked at her as he gathered his things, and when she asked what he was doing, he simply said, "I'm leaving." Lily felt her world crumble. She didn't even have time to react before he was gone. Just like that, he was out the door, and all she had left were the pieces of a shattered life. He had left her. He had left her alone to figure out how to pick up the pieces, how to explain to the world why her perfect life had fallen apart. And so, Lily was left with nothing but the echoes of promises broken and a future she had never imagined. She was alone, but she was strong. She would survive. But as she stood there in the silence of their empty home, she couldn't shake the feeling that David's departure had left a wound too deep to ever heal. The life they had shared was over, and she had no idea what the next chapter would look like, only that it would be without him. The days after David's departure were like a blur, a haze of confusion and disbelief. At first, Lily couldn't comprehend the finality of it all. David had been everything to her, her lover, her partner, her best friend. How could he just walk away? There had been no explanation, no apology, just a suitcase and the slamming of a door. In the quiet that followed, Lily found herself lost in the echoes of their past, unable to fathom a future without him in it. For a long time, she kept to herself. The world outside her home felt like a distant reality, one she wasn't ready to face. Friends called, worried about her, but she couldn't bring herself to speak to them. How could she explain what had happened? How could she put into words the pain of having someone she loved, someone she trusted, just vanish without a trace? The isolation was suffocating, but in a strange way, it was also a comfort. The loneliness mirrored the emptiness she felt inside, and for a while, it seemed easier to stay in the quiet of her own thoughts than to confront the harsh reality of a life without him. But life didn't wait. Michael and Emma, her beautiful twins, were still there, growing up before her eyes. They were only 6 when David left, too young to fully understand the weight of his absence. At first, they asked about their father, wondering where he had gone, why he didn't visit. It broke Lily's heart every time they asked, but she did her best to shield them from the truth, from the bitterness that now lingered in her mind. She told them that their father was busy, that he loved them but had to take care of important things. It wasn't a lie, not entirely, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She couldn't bring herself to tell them that their father had chosen everything else over them. That wasn't a story she could share with 2 innocent children. As the years went on, the pain of David's absence slowly shifted from sharp agony to a dull ache that never truly went away. Lily learned how to keep going, how to push through the days even when the weight of the past threatened to crush her. She threw herself into her work, taking on freelance projects, managing her finances, and trying to rebuild the life that had been shattered. There were days when she felt like a shadow of the woman she once was, but the twins kept her grounded. Their laughter, their curiosity, their endless energy, they reminded her that there was still joy to be found in the world, even without the life she had envisioned with David. But it wasn't easy. The emotional scars David had left on her were deep, and no amount of time could erase them. She had to learn how to trust herself again, how to trust her instincts, how to be a mother without a partner by her side. There were moments when she felt like she was failing, when the pressure of being both mother and father seemed too heavy to bear. But there were other moments, quieter moments, when she realized just how strong she had become. She had raised 2 children on her own, kept a roof over their heads, and maintained some semblance of peace in her life. She wasn't perfect, but she was surviving, and in many ways, that was enough. It wasn't until the twins were 8 that Lily's life began to shift again. It started with a phone call, an unexpected call from an old friend. Her name was Claire, and she had been one of Lily's closest friends before everything fell apart. Claire had been there when Lily and David first met, and she had always been a part of their lives in one way or another. But when David left, Claire had distanced herself. She didn't want to take sides, didn't want to get caught in the middle of the mess that Lily's life had become. Lily understood, but it had still hurt to lose that connection. So when Claire called out of the blue one afternoon, Lily was hesitant but curious. "Lily, it's been too long," Claire said, her voice warm with familiarity. "I know we've lost touch, but I've been thinking about you. How have you been?" Lily smiled at the sound of her old friend's voice. It felt like a small breath of fresh air, like a reminder that there was a world beyond her own pain. She filled Claire in on the basics, her work, the twins, how she had been managing since David's departure, but she didn't go into details. Some things were just too hard to talk about. "I'm doing okay," she said, her voice steady. "Busy, but managing. The kids are great. They're growing up so fast." "That's wonderful to hear," Claire replied. "I'm actually in town for a few days. Would you want to meet up? It's been way too long." Lily hesitated. The idea of seeing an old friend, of reconnecting, made her feel both hopeful and nervous. Would it bring back too many memories? Would she be able to face her past without crumbling? But something inside her told her it was time. Time to take a step forward, even if it was just a small one. "Sure," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do it." They arranged to meet at a local cafe the following afternoon. The place was quiet and familiar, and when Lily walked in, she immediately spotted Claire sitting by the window, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a cup of tea in front of her. The years had changed them both. Claire was no longer the carefree, adventurous friend she had been in their younger days. She had settled into her own life, with a steady job and a family of her own. But the warmth in her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she saw Lily, was the same as it had always been. "Lily," Claire said, standing up to hug her. "It's so good to see you." Lily felt a lump in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "It's good to see you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. They sat down, and for the first few minutes, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about their lives, their families, the changes that had come with the passing of time. But then, as the conversation shifted, Claire's tone grew more serious. "I've been hearing things about David," she said carefully, her gaze searching Lily's face. "I know you don't talk about him much, but I wanted to check in. Is he okay?" Lily's heart skipped a beat. It had been years since anyone had brought up David, and the mention of his name still had the power to stir up feelings she had worked so hard to bury. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I haven't heard from him in years." Claire nodded, her expression one of understanding. "I know it must be hard for you, Lily. But you've done so much. You've raised two incredible kids, and you've built a life for yourself. You don't have to keep carrying that burden alone." Lily smiled weakly, but the words had a truth to them. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of David's abandonment, trying to fill the hole he had left behind, that she hadn't given herself permission to heal. She had been so focused on the past, on what she had lost, that she hadn't fully embraced the life she had now. As the conversation turned to lighter topics, Lily felt a sense of relief, as though the weight on her chest had lightened just a little. But the thought of David still lingered, a shadow she couldn't quite shake. She didn't know where he was now, or what he had become. But she knew one thing: it didn't matter anymore. She had a new life to live, one that didn't depend on the man who had left her so long ago. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could move forward. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it, on her own, with her children by her side, and the hope that perhaps the best was yet to come. Months passed, and life settled into a steady rhythm. Lily had become accustomed to the ebb and flow of daily life without David. The twins, now 10 years old, were thriving. They were bright, curious, and full of energy, each of them developing their own personalities, quirks, and passions. Emma had developed an interest in art, often spending hours sketching elaborate designs, while Michael had become an avid reader, devouring books about space, history, and anything that ignited his imagination. Lily found herself enjoying their company more than ever before, and though she carried the pain of her past, it had softened, faded into the background as she focused on creating a stable, loving home for her children. Lily also began to re-enter the social world. Her connection with Claire, who had remained a supportive friend, was a lifeline. The two women spent more time together, often having coffee dates or weekend get-togethers with their families. Claire had become a constant presence in Lily's life, reminding her that life still held beauty and potential, even if it didn't look the way she had once imagined. But just when Lily thought she had finally moved beyond the past, a fateful encounter at the mall turned her world upside down. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Lily decided to take the twins to the local shopping center. They had been planning to visit the bookstore, grab a bite to eat, and just enjoy a relaxed day. It was nothing special, just a regular outing, one of those moments where the ordinary felt comforting. Lily, with her hair tied back in a loose ponytail and wearing a casual outfit, was lost in the moment, her thoughts drifting between the book she had just started reading and her plans for the evening. As they walked through the crowded mall, Michael and Emma tugged at her hands, excitedly discussing their latest interests. Emma wanted to visit the art supply store, and Michael was eager to find a new book to add to his growing collection. Lily smiled, her heart swelling with pride at their vibrant personalities. They were growing up so fast, and it was clear they were destined for greatness, whatever paths they chose. But then, as they rounded a corner near the food court, Lily froze. There, standing just a few feet away, was a man she hadn't seen in years. At first, it took her a moment to process the sight. It was like her mind refused to acknowledge the possibility. But there was no mistaking it, standing before her, looking just as she remembered him, was David. He hadn't aged much, his appearance still that of the sharp, successful businessman she once knew. He wore a tailored suit, though it wasn't quite as polished as the ones he used to wear. His dark hair, now slightly graying at the temples, was styled in the same way it had been all those years ago. But what really caught her attention were his eyes. There was something in them that had always drawn her in. A certain intensity, a depth that she hadn't realized she missed until now. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Lily felt as though she was frozen in place, caught between the past and the present. She had always wondered what it would feel like to see him again, but she never imagined it would happen this way, by chance, in the middle of a crowded mall, with no warning, no time to prepare herself. David's eyes flickered toward her, and for a second, there was a hesitation, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. He blinked, as if unsure of what he was seeing, but then, his expression shifted. His features hardened, and for a moment, Lily could see the distance in his eyes. The same distance that had been there when he left her all those years ago. He hadn't changed. He was still the same man, distant, focused on his own world, unable to truly connect with anyone, least of all her. Lily? His voice was tentative, but there was no warmth in it. No joy, no surprise, just a cold recognition of the woman he had abandoned. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what to say, how to react. All the emotions she had buried over the years surged to the surface: anger, confusion, hurt. How dare he? How could he just show up like this, after all this time, after all the pain he had caused? But she couldn't let him see how much he still affected her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She glanced at the twins, who were now staring at the man before them with wide eyes. They didn't know who he was, but Lily could see the curiosity and confusion in their faces. She couldn't let them see her fall apart, not here, not now. "David," she said, her voice calm, though the words felt heavy in her mouth. "What are you doing here?" David's gaze shifted from her to the twins, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate again, as if processing something. Then, his eyes softened, just slightly, before he spoke again. I didn't expect to see you like this, he said, his voice low. I didn't expect to see them. Lily's heart skipped a beat. The twins, though still young, had his eyes. There was no mistaking it. Michael and Emma shared the same deep brown gaze that had once melted her heart. But what struck her most was the way David looked at them. There was no recognition in his eyes, no sign that he remembered the children he had left behind. It was as if they were strangers to him, as if he had never been part of their lives. She glanced down at the twins, who were still staring at David with curiosity. Emma's hand gripped her own tighter, sensing the tension in the air. Michael, ever the inquisitive one, asked the question Lily had been dreading. Who is he, Mom? Lily's stomach twisted, but she forced a smile. He's someone from my past, sweetheart. Don't worry about it. David's gaze flickered to the twins once more, and this time, there was a brief flicker of something, perhaps regret, or recognition, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by the same guarded expression that had haunted him for years. I should go, he muttered, turning away abruptly. Before Lily could respond, he was walking away, disappearing into the crowd, just as suddenly as he had appeared. Lily stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. What had just happened? Was it really him? Had he just acknowledged the twins? Why had he acted as if he didn't even know them? She shook her head, trying to clear the confusion from her mind. But there was no denying it, David had returned, and with him, all the unresolved emotions she had thought she had buried. The twins, sensing the shift in her mood, fell silent. Emma looked up at her, her big brown eyes wide with concern. Mom, is he okay? She asked softly, not fully understanding the depth of the situation but sensing that something wasn't right. Lily bent down, brushing a strand of hair away from Emma's face. I'm fine, sweetheart, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. Let's go home. But as they walked out of the mall and into the cool air of the evening, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning. Something had shifted, something that she couldn't yet understand. David was back, and with his return, the past that she had so carefully buried was rising to the surface, ready to challenge everything she had built. She didn't know what it meant, or where it would lead, but one thing was certain, she was no longer in control. The future, once so carefully mapped out, was now uncertain. And as Lily walked away from the mall with her children by her side, she realized that her life, once again, was on the edge of something unexpected. The story she had thought was over had only just begun. The days that followed the unexpected encounter in the mall were filled with a strange mixture of emotions. Lily tried to return to normal, to carry on as she had before, but something had shifted within her. The sight of David, so unexpected and so cold, had brought back memories that she had long buried. She hadn't realized just how much of herself she had locked away to survive, to move forward, until that moment. The rawness of her feelings, the unresolved anger, the hurt, and the betrayal, all came rushing back. And though she tried to bury it once again, the weight of it lingered, casting a shadow over every part of her life. The twins seemed unaffected by the brief encounter. Emma and Michael went about their days, still absorbed in their activities, still as energetic and curious as ever. Lily, on the other hand, couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. David had come back into her life, but it wasn't the reunion she had imagined. It wasn't the closure she had hoped for. It felt more like a crack in the door, one that was slowly opening to reveal something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Over the next few weeks, Lily found herself consumed by questions that had long been buried. Where had David gone? What had he been doing all these years? Why had he left her without so much as an explanation? And most haunting of all, why hadn't he ever reached out to the children? The twins, despite the passing years, were still his flesh and blood. How could he have abandoned them so easily? The questions ate at her, and though she tried to push them away, they refused to be silenced. One afternoon, as she sat at her kitchen table, sorting through bills and planning for the upcoming months, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, and for a moment, she hesitated. A part of her wanted to ignore it, not wanting to deal with any more uncertainty, but something inside her urged her to pick up. She did. "Lily," a voice said on the other end, a voice that was unmistakable. "David." Her heart skipped a beat, and she almost dropped the phone. "David," she said, her voice tight. "What do you want?" I didn't mean for things to end the way they did," he said, his voice soft but tinged with an emotion Lily couldn't quite place. "I've been thinking about you, about the twins. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need to talk. I need to explain." Lily's breath caught in her throat. The audacity of it, after all these years, after everything he had done, he now wanted to explain. She felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, but she tamped it down. She had worked so hard to move past him, to put the past behind her. The thought of hearing his voice again, of listening to whatever excuse he had for abandoning them, made her stomach churn. But a part of her, some small, vulnerable part, wondered if there was a chance, however small, that she could finally get some answers. "Explain?" she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "After all this time? What do you possibly have left to explain?" "I know it's a lot to ask," he said quickly. "But I owe you that much. At least that. Please. Can we meet? Just for a few minutes. I'll respect your boundaries. I just need to talk." Lily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of his words, the tension in his voice, and she found herself at a crossroads. Part of her wanted to slam the phone down, to end this once and for all. But another part of her, the part that had never truly gotten closure, the part that still held on to the idea of the man she had once loved, wanted to hear him out. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Fine," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "We'll meet. But this is it. No more games. No more lies. Just the truth." The following afternoon, they met at a small cafe, one Lily had frequented over the years. It was a place she liked, quiet, unassuming, a refuge from the chaos of her daily life. When she arrived, she saw him sitting at a corner table, waiting. He was dressed in a casual jacket and slacks, looking almost out of place in the simplicity of the cafe, but his presence still commanded attention. He looked older, worn in ways she hadn't noticed before, but there was still that sharpness to his gaze, the same intensity that had drawn her to him all those years ago. As she walked toward him, he stood up, his face a mixture of regret and nervousness. There was no grand greeting, no attempt to pretend that everything was fine. He simply looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite decipher. When they sat down, the silence between them was thick, uncomfortable. "I didn't want this to happen," he began, his voice low. "I never wanted to hurt you, Lily. I didn't know what else to do." Lily stared at him, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean, you didn't know what else to do?" she asked, her voice hard. "You left me. You left our children. You didn't even give us a chance. You didn't even care enough to explain. You just walked out and didn't look back." David winced, as if her words were a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. "I was selfish," he said, his voice raw. "I was terrified. The pressure of everything, work, the business, our lives, became too much. I was drowning in it. And instead of asking for help, instead of talking to you, I just ran. I thought I could escape everything by disappearing. But it was the biggest mistake of my life. Leaving you, leaving the kids. I never should have done it. Lily could feel her pulse quicken, her chest tightening with the emotions that threatened to explode. He had left her. He had walked away without a second thought, and now he was sitting here, trying to apologize, trying to justify it. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to make him understand the pain he had caused. But instead, she sat in silence, letting his words wash over her, trying to process the enormity of what he was saying. "And what about the twins?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about Emma and Michael? You never even called them. Never once tried to reach out. How could you do that? How could you pretend they didn't exist?" David's face crumpled at the mention of their children. I know I failed them. And I can't change that. I can't take back the years I lost, the time I should have spent with them. But I want to try, Lily. I want to try to be a part of their lives. I want to make it right." Lily felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but she quickly suppressed it. "You can't just show up after all this time and expect everything to be okay," she said, her voice cold. "You don't get to erase the past just because you feel guilty now." David looked at her, his eyes filled with regret, and for a brief moment, she almost believed him. Almost. But the reality of it all was that too much had happened. Too many years had passed, too many promises broken. And no matter how sincere he seemed now, no matter how sorry he was, the damage had been done. "I don't know if I can forgive you, David," she said finally, her voice steady, but her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. "But I'll think about what you've said. I'll think about it for the kids." The silence that followed was thick, and though David seemed to want to say more, he remained quiet. He reached for her hand, but Lily pulled it back, not ready to let him in again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As they parted ways, Lily felt a strange sense of finality. She didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know if David would truly change, or if he would disappear again, as he had done all those years ago. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had regained control over her own life. She had faced him, listened to his words, and allowed herself to consider the possibility of a future where he could be a part of it, if only for the sake of their children. But she wouldn't make the same mistake again. She wouldn't be fooled by his promises. The past had shown her just how fragile trust could be, and now, she would protect herself. She would protect her children. He would not let the past repeat itself. The road ahead was uncertain, but Lily knew that no matter what happened, she would face it on her own terms. And with that, she took a step forward, leaving the past, and David, behind. The weeks that followed the conversation with David felt like a delicate balance. Lily tried to continue her life, but everything had shifted. David's sudden reappearance, his apology, and his vague promises of trying to make things right weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't forget the pain of the past, nor could she simply brush aside the questions and the raw emotions his return had stirred up. But at the same time, she didn't want to let this one man, who had hurt her so deeply, control her anymore. She had spent years rebuilding her life, her family, and her sense of self. She wouldn't let him destroy all that progress. Every time she looked at Emma and Michael, the twins who had become her whole world, the thought of David's abandonment gnawed at her. They were innocent in all of this, and yet, they had been the ones to bear the brunt of his absence. They had missed out on having a father, on a man who should have been there to guide them, to nurture them. How could he show up now, after so many years, and expect everything to fall back into place? It didn't work like that, did it? She knew she couldn't trust him again, not without seeing proof that he had truly changed, not without understanding why he had left in the first place. She couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable again, not without knowing for sure that his actions matched his words. But the lingering doubts, the curiosity about his reasons for leaving, kept her up at night. Every time she closed her eyes, she wondered why. What had driven him to walk away from everything they had built? Was it really just about work and pressure, as he claimed? Or was there something more, something she didn't know about? He had been so closed off back then, so distant, that Lily had never been able to figure it out. Maybe now, after everything, she could finally get the answers she so desperately needed. But was it worth it? Was it worth opening up old wounds? Lily's nights became restless. She would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with her thoughts. She still didn't know if she could forgive David, but she had to admit that part of her longed for closure. She had spent so much of her life wondering why he had abandoned them, why he had left her without even the decency to explain. She wanted to understand. She needed to understand. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Lily found herself once again staring at her phone. It had been days since David had reached out to her, but she couldn't seem to shake the feeling that there was something more he needed to say. She had to make a decision. She had to either accept what he had told her and move on, or face the truth head-on and allow him back into their lives. The question was, how could she? The question was, how could she trust him again? Her fingers hovered over the screen, and before she could second-guess herself, she sent him a message. David, can we meet again? I need answers. The seconds felt like hours as she waited for a reply. She almost regretted sending the message. What if he didn't respond? What if he had already moved on? But then, her phone buzzed, and when she looked at the screen, she saw his name. Yes, of course. When and where? Lily typed out a time and place, a small, quiet park they both used to visit when they were younger, a place filled with memories, both good and bad. It seemed fitting. She didn't know what she hoped to find, but she knew that this was the only way to move forward. The answers she sought wouldn't come from staying in the past. She had to confront it. She had to face him again, once and for all. The day of the meeting arrived, and Lily felt a familiar sense of unease in the pit of her stomach. The park was quiet, the air crisp with the first signs of autumn. The trees were just starting to change color, their leaves a mixture of reds, oranges, and yellows, as if nature itself was signaling a shift. She arrived early, giving herself a few moments to gather her thoughts, to brace herself for what was about to come. David arrived shortly after, his familiar figure appearing in the distance. As he walked toward her, Lily could see the same man she had once loved, but there was a difference now. The man she had known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed more vulnerable, more human. He wasn't the confident, arrogant businessman anymore. He was just a man, facing the consequences of his choices. They stood there for a moment, neither of them saying anything. The silence between them was thick, charged with all the emotions they had been carrying for so long. Finally, David spoke. I didn't know what to say when you messaged me, he admitted, his voice quieter than it had been before. I'm not sure what I can say, but I need to try. I need you to understand. Lily crossed her arms over her chest, her expression guarded. She had no intention of letting him off the hook, not this time. You owe me an explanation, David. You owe it to me, to the kids. You left us without a word, without any reason. All these years, I've had to do everything on my own, and you didn't even care enough to reach out. How could you do that? David's face tightened as he took a deep breath, looking away for a moment as if he were collecting his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was heavier, tinged with regret. I wasn't in a good place back then, he began, his eyes fixed on the ground. I had this idea of what my life was supposed to be, this image of success and control, and I thought I had to live up to it. But the truth is, I was drowning. The pressure from work, the demands, the constant stress, it consumed me. And when things started falling apart between us, when I started pulling away, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you, how to admit that I wasn't the person I pretended to be. I thought leaving would make it easier, that you would be better off without me. I thought I could fix myself, figure things out, and then come back. But I was wrong. I've spent all these years trying to make sense of it, trying to find redemption. But I know I can't change the past. Lily listened, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him how selfish he had been, how much he had hurt her. But something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, made her pause. It was the first time in years that she had seen him truly vulnerable, truly remorseful. For a moment, she was tempted to believe him. But the truth was, the damage had already been done. She had built her life without him, had moved forward in a way that didn't include him. She had been strong for herself and for their children, and she wasn't sure if she could ever let him back in, even if she wanted to. I can't undo what happened, she said, her voice tight. And I can't just forget what you did. But I need to know that you're really going to change. That you're really going to be there for the kids, that you won't disappear again when things get hard. David nodded, his expression one of determination. I will. I'll prove it to you. I'll do whatever it takes. The words hung in the air, but Lily wasn't sure if she believed him. She wanted to, but she had been let down so many times before. She wasn't ready to trust him again, not fully. But there was a part of her that hoped, a part of her that wanted to believe that people could change, that redemption was possible. For the first time in years, Lily felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, hope. The future was still uncertain, still full of questions and doubts, but perhaps there was a chance, small as it might be, that this could be the beginning of something different. Not just for her, but for their family. I'll take it one day at a time, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. But don't expect me to just forgive and forget. You'll have to show me that you're really here for us. David nodded again, his eyes filled with resolve. I will. I promise. And as they stood there, facing each other in the quiet park, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be filled with challenges, but also with the possibility of healing, of growth, and of redemption. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, she was willing to let herself believe in it.